Maybe they were deported and went out to sea on the Ellis Island ferry singing the International. The growl of the International over the water, fading sighing into the mist. Deported. James Herf, young newspaper man of 190, West 12th Street, recently lost his 20s. Appearing before Judge Maravalli, they were remanded to Ellis Island for deportation as undesirable aliens. The younger four, Sasha, Michael, Nicholas and Vladimir, had been held for some time on a charge of criminal anarchy. The fifth and sixth were held on a technical charge of vagrancy. The later ones, Bill, Tony and Joe, were held under various indictments including wife-beating, arson, assault, and prostitution. All were convicted on counts of misfeasance, malfeasance, and nonfeasance. Oh yes, prisoner at the bar. I find the evidence dubious, said the judge, pouring himself out a snifter. The clerk of the court, who was stirring an old-fashioned cocktail, became overgrown with vine leaves and the courtroom reeked with the smell of flowering grapes, and the shining bootlegger took the bulls by the horns and led them lowing gently down the courthouse steps. Court is adjourned by Hickey, shouted the judge when he found gin in his water bottle. The reporters discovered the mayor dressed in a leopard skin, posing as civic virtue with his foot on the back of Princess Fifi, the Oriental dancer. Your correspondent was leaning out of the window of the Bankers Club in the company of his uncle, Jefferson T. Maravalli, well-known clubman of this city, in 2 lamb chops well peppered. Meanwhile the waiters were hastily organizing an orchestra, using the potbellies of the Gossenheimers for snare drums. The head waiter gave a truly delightful rendition of My Old Kentucky Home, utilizing for the first time the resonant bald heads of the 7 directors of the Well-Watered Gasoline Company of Delaware as a xylophone. And all the while the shining bootlegger in purple running drawers and a blue-ribbon silk hat was leading the bulls up Broadway to the number of 2,342,501. As they reached the Spuyten Duyvil, they were incontinently drowned, rank after rank, in an attempt to swim to Yonkers. And as I sit here, thought Jimmy Herf, print itches like a rash inside me. I sit here pockmarked with print. He got to his feet. A little yellow dog was curled up asleep under the bench. The little yellow dog looked very happy. What I need's a good sleep, Jimmy said aloud. What are you going to do with it, Dutch? Are you going to hawk it? Francie, I wouldn't take $1 million for that little gun. For God's sake don't start talking about money, now. Next thing some cop'll see it on your hip and arrest you for the Sullivan Law. The cop who's going to arrest me's not born yet. Just you forget that stuff. Francie began to whimper. But Dutch, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? Dutch suddenly rammed the pistol into his pocket and jumped to his feet. He walked jerkily back and forth on the asphalt path. It was a foggy evening, raw, automobiles moving along the slushy road made an endless interweaving flicker of cobwebby light among the skeleton shrubberies. Jez, you make me nervous with your whimperin' and cryin'. Can't you shut up? He sat down beside her sullenly again. I thought I heard somebody movin' in the bushes. This goddamn park's full of plainclothes men. There's nowhere you can go in the whole crummy city without people watchin' you. I wouldn't mind it if I didn't feel so rotten. I can't eat anything without throwin' up and I'm so scared all the time the other girls'll notice something. But I've told you I had a way o' fixin' everything, ain't I? I promise you I'll fix everything fine in a couple of days. We'll go away and get married. We'll go down south. I bet there's lots of jobs in other places. I'm getting cold, let's get the hell out of here. Oh Dutch, said Francie in a tired voice as they walked down the muddy glistening asphalt path, do you think we're ever going to have a good time again like we used to? We're SOL. Now but that don't mean we're always going to be. I lived through those gas attacks in the Oregon forest, didn't I? I've been doping out a lot of things these last few days. Dutch, if you go and get arrested there'll be nothing left for me to do but jump in the river. Didn't I tell you I wasn't going to get arrested? Mrs. Cohen, a bent old woman with a face brown and blotched like a russet apple, stands beside the kitchen table with her gnarled hands folded over her belly. She sways from the hips as she scolds in an endless querulous stream of Yiddish at Anna sitting bleary-eyed with sleep over a cup of coffee. If you had been blasted in the cradle it would have been better, if you had been born dead. Oi, what for have I raised 4 children that they should all of them be no good, agitators and streetwalkers and bums. Benny in jail twice, and Sol God knows we're making trouble, and Sarah accursed given up to sin kicking up her legs at Minsky's, and now you, may you wither in your chair, picketing for the garment workers. Walking along the street shameless with a sign on your back. Anna dipped a piece of bread in the coffee and put it in her mouth. "Ah, Mama, you don't understand," she said with her mouth full. Understand harlotry and sinfulness. Oi, why don't you attend to your work and keep your mouth shut, and draw your pay quietly? You used to make good money and could have got married decent before you took to running wild in dance halls with a goy. Oi, that I've raised daughters in my old age no decent man want to take to his house and marry." Anna got to her feet shrieking, "It's no business of yours. I've always paid my part of the rent regular. You think a girl's worth nothin' but for a slave and to grind her fingers off workin' all her life. I think different, do you hear? Don't you dare scold at me. Oi, you will talk back to your old mother. If Solomon was alive he'd take a stick to you. Better to have been born dead than talk back to your mother like a goy. Get out of the house and quick before I blast you." "All right, I will." Anna ran through the narrow trunk-obstructed hallway to the bedroom and threw herself on her bed. Her cheeks were burning. She lay quiet trying to think. From the kitchen came the old woman's fierce monotonous sobbing. Anna raised herself to a sitting posture on the bed. She caught sight in the mirror opposite of a strained tear-dabbled face and rumpled stringy hair. "My God, I'm a sight," she sighed. As she got to her feet her heel caught on the braid of her dress. The dress tore sharply. Anna sat on the edge of the bed and cried and cried. Then she sewed the rent in the dress up carefully with tiny meticulous stitches. Sewing made her feel calmer. She put on her hat, powdered her nose copiously, put a little rouge on her lips, got into her coat and went out. April was coaxing unexpected colors out of the east side streets. Sweet voluptuous freshness came from a pushcart full of pineapples. At the corner she found Rose Siegel and Lillian Diamond drinking Coca-Cola at the soft drink stand. "Anna, have a Coke with us," they chimed. "I will if you'll blow me. I'm broke." "Vi, didn't you get your strike pay?" "I gave it all to the old woman. Don't do no good though. She goes on scoldin' all day long. She's too old. Did you hear how gunmen broke in and busted up Ike Goldstein's shop? Busted up everything with hammers and left him unconscious on top of a lot of dress goods. Oh, that's terrible. Soive him right, I say. But they oughtn't to destroy property like that. We make our livin' by it as much as he does. A pretty fine livin'. I'm near dead with it," said Anna, banging her empty glass down on the counter. Easy, said the man in the stand, "look out for the crockery." "But the worst thing was," went on Rose Siegel, "that while they was fightin' up in Goldstein's a rivet flew out the winder and fell 9 stories and killed a fireman passin' on a truck so's he dropped dead in the street." "What for did they do that?" "Some guy must have slung it at some other guy and it pitched out of the winder. And killed a fireman." Anna saw Elmer coming towards them down the avenue, his thin face stuck forward, his hands hidden in the pockets of his frayed overcoat. She left the 2 girls and walked towards him. "Was you goin' down to the house?" "Don't let's go, 'cause the old woman's scoldin' somethin' terrible. I wish I could get her into the Daughters of Israel. I can't stand her no more." "Then let's walk over and sit in the square," said Elmer. "Don't you feel the spring?" She looked at him out of the corner of her eye. "Don't I? Oh Elmer, I wish this strike was over. It gets me crazy doin' nothin' all day." "But Anna, the strike is the workers' great opportunity, the workers' university. It gives you a chance to study and read and go to the public library. But you always think it'll be over in a day or two, and what's the use anyway? The more educated a feller is, the more use he is to his class. They sat down on a bench with their backs to the playground. The sky overhead was glittering with mother-of-pearl flakes of sunset. Dirty children yelled and racketed about the asphalt paths. "Oh," said Anna, looking up at the sky, "I'd like to have a Paris evening dress and you have a dress suit and go out to dinner at a swell restaurant and go to the theater and everything. If we lived in a decent society we might be able to. There'd be gaiety for the workers then, after the revolution. But Elmer, what's the use if we're old and scoldin' like the old woman? Our children will have those things." Anna sat bolt upright on the seat. "I ain't never goin' to have any children," she said between her teeth, "never, never, never." Alice touched his arm as they turned to look in the window of an Italian pastry shop. On each cake, ornamented with bright aniline flowers and flutings, stood a sugar lamb for Easter and the resurrection banner. "Jimmy," she said, turning up to him her little oval face with her lips too red like the roses on the cakes, "you've got to do something about Roy. He's got to get to work. I'll go crazy if I have him sitting round the house any more reading the papers wearing that dreadful adenoid expression. You know what I mean. He respects you. But he's trying to get a job. He doesn't really try, you know it. He thinks he does. I guess he's got a funny idea about himself. But I'm a fine person to talk about jobs. Oh, I know, I think it's wonderful. Everybody says you've given up newspaper work and are going to write." Jimmy found himself looking down into her widening brown eyes, that had a glimmer at the bottom like the glimmer of water in a well. He turned his head away, there was a catch in his throat, he coughed. They walked on along the lilting bright-colored street. At the door of the restaurant they found Roy and Martin Schiff waiting for them. They went through an outer room into a long hall crowded with tables packed between two greenish-bluish paintings of the Bay of Naples. The air was heavy with a smell of Parmesan cheese and cigarette smoke and tomato sauce. Alice made a little face as she settled herself in a chair. "Oh, I want a cocktail right away, quick." "I must be kinder simple-minded," said Herf, "but these boats coquetting in front of Vesuvius always make me feel like getting a move on somewhere. I think I'll be getting along out of here in a couple of weeks." "But Jimmy, where are you going?" asked Roy. "Isn't this something new?" "Hasn't Helena got something to say about that?" put in Alice. Herf turned red. "Why should she?" he said sharply. "I just found there was nothing in it for me," he found himself saying a little later. "Oh, we none of us know what we want," burst out Martin. "That's why we're such a peewee generation." "I'm beginning to learn a few of the things I don't want," said Herf quietly. "At least I'm beginning to have the nerve to admit to myself how much I dislike all the things I don't want." "But it's wonderful," cried Alice, throwing away a career for an ideal. "Excuse me," said Herf, pushing back his chair. In the toilet he looked himself in the eye in the wavy looking-glass. "Don't talk," he whispered. "What you talk about you never do." His face had a drunken look. He filled the hollow of his two hands with water and washed it. At the table they cheered when he sat down. "Yeah, for the wanderer," said Roy. Alice was eating cheese on long slices of pear. "I think it's thrilling," she said. "Roy is bored," shouted Martin Schiff after a silence. His face with its big eyes and bone glasses swam through the smoke of the restaurant like a fish in a murky aquarium. "I was just thinking of all the places I had to go to look for a job tomorrow." "You want a job?" Martin went on melodramatically. "You want to sell your soul to the highest bidder?" "Jez, if that's all you had to sell," moaned Roy. "It's my morning sleep that worries me. Still, it is lousy putting over your personality and all that stuff. It's not your ability to do the work, it's your personality. Prostitutes are the only honest. But good Lord, a prostitute sells her personality. She only rents it. But Roy is bored. You are all bored. I'm boring you all. We're having the time of our lives," insisted Alice. "Now Martin, we wouldn't be sitting here if we were bored, would we?" I wish Jimmy would tell us where he expected to go on his mysterious travels. No, you are saying to yourselves what a bore he is, what use is he to society? He has no money, he has no pretty wife, no good conversation, no tips on the stock market. He's a useless fardel on society. The artist is a fardel. That's not so, Martin. You're talking through your hat. Martin waved an arm across the table. 2 wineglasses upset. A scared-looking waiter laid a napkin over the red streams. Without noticing, Martin went on, it's all pretense. When you talk with the little lying tips of your tongues. You don't dare lay bare your real souls. But now you must listen to me for the last time. For the last time I say. Come here, waiter, you two, lean over and look into the black pit of the soul of man. And Herf is bored. You are all bored, bored flies buzzing on the windowpane. You think the windowpane is the room. You don't know what there is deep black inside. I am very drunk. Waiter, another bottle. Say, hold your horses, Martin. I don't know if we can pay the bill as it is. We don't need any more. Waiter, another bottle of wine and 4 grappas. Well, it looks as if we were in for a rough night, groaned Roy. If there is need, my body can pay. Alice, take off your mask. You are a beautiful little child behind your mask. Come with me to the edge of the pit. Oh, I am too drunk to tell you what I feel. He brushed off his tortoise-shell glasses and crumpled them in his hand, the lenses shot glittering across the floor. The gaping waiter ducked among the tables after them. For a moment Martin sat blinking. The rest of them looked at each other. Then he shot to his feet. I see your little smirking superciliosity. No wonder we can no longer have decent dinners, decent conversations. I must prove my atavistic sincerity, prove. He started pulling at his necktie. Say, Martin, old man, pipe down, Roy was reiterating. Nobody shall stop me. I must run into the sincerity of black. I must run to the end of the Black Wharf on the East River and throw myself off. Herf ran after him through the restaurant to the street. At the door he threw off his coat, at the corner his vest. Gosh, he runs like a deer, panted Roy, staggering against Herf's shoulder. Herf picked up the coat and vest, folded them under his arm and went back to the restaurant. They were pale when they sat down on either side of Alice. Will he really do it? Will he really do it? She kept asking. No, of course not, said Roy. He'll go home, he was making fools of us because we played up to him. Suppose he really did it? I'd hate to see him. I like him very much. We named our kid after him, said Jimmy gloomily. But if he really feels so terribly unhappy, what right have we to stop him? Oh, Jimmy, sighed Alice, do order some coffee. Outside a fire engine moaned, throbbed, roared down the street. Their hands were cold. They sipped the coffee without speaking. Francie came out of the side door of the 5 and 10 into the 6 o'clock going home end of the day crowd. Dutch Robertson was waiting for her. He was smiling, there was color in his face. Why, Dutch, what's? The words stuck in her throat. Don't you like it? They walked on down 14th, a blur of faces streamed by on either side of them. Everything's Jake, Francie, he was saying quietly. He wore a light gray spring overcoat and a light felt hat to match. New red pointed Oxfords glowed on his feet. How do you like the outfit? I said to myself it wasn't no use trying to do anything without a Tony outside. But Dutch, how did you get it? Stuck up a guy in a cigar store. Jez, it was a cinch. SSH, don't talk so loud, somebody might hear ye. They wouldn't know what I was talking about. Mr. Dench sat in the corner of Mrs. Dench's Louis XIV boudoir. He sat all hunched up on a little gilt pink-backed chair with his potbelly resting on his knees. In his green sagging face the pudgy nose and the folds that led from the flanges of the nostrils to the corners of the wide mouth made 2 triangles. He had a pile of telegrams in his hand, on top a decoded message on a blue slip that read, "Deficit Hamburg branch approximately $500,000, signed Heinz." Everywhere he looked about the little room crowded with fluffy glittery objects he saw the purple letters of approximately jiggling in the air. Then he noticed that the maid, a pale mulatto in a ruffled cap, had come into the room and was staring at him. His eye lit on a large flat cardboard box she held in her hand. "What's that?" "Something for the missus, sir." "Bring it here." "Hickson's, and what does she want to be buying more dresses for, will you tell me that?" "Hickson's." "Open it up. If it looks expensive I'll send it back." The maid gingerly pulled off a layer of tissue paper, uncovering a peach and pea-green evening dress. Mr. Dench got to his feet spluttering, "She must think the war's still on. Tell 'em we will not receive it. Tell 'em there's no such party livin' here." The maid picked up the box with a toss of the head and went out with her nose in the air. Mr. Dench sat down in the little chair and began looking over the telegrams again. "Nee, nee," came a shrill voice from the inner room. This was followed by a head in a lace cap shaped like a liberty cap and a big body in a shapeless ruffled negligee. "Why, J.D., what are you doing here at this time of the morning?" "I'm waiting for my hairdresser." "It's very important. I just had a cable from Heinz." "Serena, my dear, Blackhead and Dench is in a very bad way on both sides of the water." "Yes, ma'am," came the maid's voice from behind him. He gave his shoulders a shrug and walked to the window. He felt tired and sick and heavy with flesh. An errand boy on a bicycle passed along the street. He was laughing and his cheeks were pink. Dench saw himself, felt himself for a second hot and slender, running bareheaded down Pine Street years ago, catching the girl's ankles in the corner of his eye. He turned back into the room. The maid had gone. "Serena," he began, "can't you understand the seriousness? It's this slump. And on top of it all the bean market has gone to hell. It's ruin, I tell you." "Well, my dear, I don't see what you expect me to do about it." "Economize, economize. Look where the price of rubber's gone to. That dress from Hickson's. Well, you wouldn't have me going to the Blackheads' party looking like a country schoolteacher, would you?" Mr. Dench groaned and shook his head. "Oh, you won't understand. Probably there won't be any party. Look, Serena, there's no nonsense about this. I want you to have a trunk packed so that we can sail any day. I need a rest. I'm thinking of going to Marienbad for the cure. It'll do you good too." Her eye suddenly caught his. All the little wrinkles on her face deepened, the skin under her eyes was like the skin of a shrunken toy balloon. He went over to her and put his hand on her shoulder and was puckering his lips to kiss her when suddenly she flared up. "I won't have you meddling between me and my dressmakers. I won't have it. I won't have it. Oh, have it your own way." He left the room with his head hunched between his thick sloping shoulders. "Nee." "Yes, ma'am." The maid came back into the room. Mrs. Dench had sunk down in the middle of a little spindle-legged sofa. Her face was green. "Annie, please get me that bottle of sweet spirits of ammonia and a little water. And Annie, you can call up Hickson's and tell them that that dress was sent back through a mistake of the butlers, and please to send it right back as I've got to wear it tonight. Pursuit of happiness, unalienable pursuit, right to life, liberty, and a black moonless night. Jimmy Herf is walking alone up South Street. Behind the wharf houses ships raise shadowy skeletons against the night. By Jesus, I admit that I'm stumped, he says aloud. All these April nights combing the streets alone, a skyscraper has obsessed him, a grooved building jutting up with uncountable bright windows falling onto him out of a scudding sky. Typewriters rain continual nickel-plate confetti in his ears. Faces of Folly's girls, glorified by Ziegfeld, smile and beckon to him from the windows. Ellie in a gold dress, Ellie made of thin gold foil, absolutely lifelike, beckoning from every window. And he walks round blocks and blocks looking for the door of the humming tinsel-windowed skyscraper, round blocks and still no door. Every time he closes his eyes the dream has hold of him, every time he stops arguing audibly with himself in pompous reasonable phrases the dream has hold of him. Young man, to save your sanity you've got to do one of two things. Please mister, where's the door to this building? Round the block. Just round the block, one of two unalienable alternatives, go away in a dirty soft shirt or stay in a clean arrow collar. But what's the use of spending your whole life fleeing the city of destruction? What about your unalienable right, 13 provinces? His mind unreeling phrases, he walks on doggedly. There's nowhere in particular he wants to go. If only I still had faith in words. How do you do, Mr. Goldstein? The reporter breezily chanted as he squeezed the thick flipper held out to him over the counter of the cigar store. My name's Brewster. I'm writing up the crime wave for the news. Mr. Goldstein was a larva-shaped man with a hooked nose a little crooked in a gray face, behind which pink attentive ears stood out unexpectedly. He looked at the reporter out of suspicious screwed-up eyes. If you'd be so good, I'd like to have your story of last night's little misadventure. Vont get no story from me, young man. That will you do, but print it so that other boys and goyles will get the same idea. It's too bad you feel that way, Mr. Goldstein. Will you give me a Robert Burns, please? Publicity, it seems to me, is as necessary as ventilation. It lets in fresh air. The reporter bit off the end of the cigar, lit it, and stood looking thoughtfully at Mr. Goldstein through a swirling ring of blue smoke. You see, Mr. Goldstein, it's this way, he began impressively. We are handling this matter from the human interest angle, pity and tears, you understand. A photographer was on his way out here to get your photograph. I bet you it would increase your volume of business for the next couple of weeks. I suppose I'll have to phone him not to come now. Well, this guy, began Mr. Goldstein abruptly, he's a well-dressed looking feller, new spring overcoat and all that, and he comes in to buy a package o' camels. A nice night, he says, opening the package and talking out a cigarette to smoke it. Then I notices the goyle with him had a veil on. Then she didn't have bobbed hair. All I seen was a kind o' mornin' veil. The first thing I knew, she was behind the counter and had a gun stuck in my ribs and began talkin', you know, kinder kidden like. And afore I knew what to think, the guide cleaned out the cash register and says to me, got any cash in your jeans, buddy? I'll tell ye, I was sweatin' some. And that's all. Sure, by the time I'd got hold of a cop they veer off to hell and gone. How much did they get? Oh, about 50 berries and $6 off me. Was the girl pretty? I dunno, maybe she was. I'd like to smashed her face in. They ought to make it the electric chair for those babies. Ain't no security nowhere. Why should anybody work if all you've got to do is get a gun and stick up your neighbors? You say they were well dressed, like well-to-do people. Yar. I'm working on the theory that he's a college boy and that she's a society girl and that they do it for sport. The feller vas a hard-looking bastard. Well, there are hard-looking college men. You wait for the story called The Gilded Bandits in next Sunday's paper, Mr. Goldstein. You take the news, don't you? Mr. Goldstein shook his head. I'll send you a copy anyway. I want to see those babies convicted, do you understand? If there's anything I can do, I sure will do it. Ain't no security no more. I don't care about no Sunday supplement publicity. Well, the photographer'll be right along. I'm sure you'll consent to pose, Mr. Goldstein. Well, thank you very much. Good day, Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein suddenly produced a shiny new revolver from under the counter and pointed it at the reporter. Hey, go easy with that. Mr. Goldstein laughed a sardonic laugh. I'm ready for 'em next time they come, he shouted after the reporter, who was already making for the subway. Our business, my dear Mrs. Herf, declaimed Mr. Harpsichord, looking sweetly in her eyes and smiling his grey Cheshire cat smile, is to roll ashore on the wave of fashion the second before it breaks, like riding a surfboard. Ellen was delicately digging with her spoon into half an alligator pear. She kept her eyes on her plate, her lips a little parted. She felt cool and slender in the tight-fitting dark blue dress, shyly alert in the middle of the tangle of sideways glances and the sing-song modish talk of the restaurant. "It's a knack that I can prophesy in you more than in any girl, and more charmingly than any girl I've ever known." "Prophesy?" asked Ellen, looking up at him laughing. "You shouldn't pick up an old man's word. I'm expressing myself badly. That's always a dangerous sign." "No, you understand so perfectly, though you disdain it a little, admit that. What we need on such a periodical, that I'm sure you could explain it to me far better. Of course what you want to do is make every reader feel Johnny on the spot in the center of things. As if she were having lunch right here at the Algonquin." "Not today but tomorrow," added Ellen. Mr. Harpsichord laughed his creaky little laugh and tried to look deep among the laughing gold specks in her gray eyes. Blushing, she looked down into the gutted half of an alligator pear in her plate. Like the sense of a mirror behind her, she felt the smart probing glances of men and women at the tables roundabout. The pancakes were comfortably furry against his gin-bitten tongue. Jimmy Herf sat in Childs in the middle of a noisy drunken company. Eyes, lips, evening dresses, the smell of bacon and coffee blurred and throbbed about him. He ate the pancakes painstakingly, called for more coffee. He felt better. He had been afraid he was going to feel sick. He began reading the paper. The print swam and spread like Japanese flowers. Then it was sharp again, orderly. Running in a smooth black and white paste over his orderly black and white brain. Misguided youth again took its toll of tragedy amid the tinsel gaieties of Coney Island, fresh painted for the season, when plainclothes men arrested Dutch Robinson and a girl companion alleged to be the flapper bandit. The pair are accused of committing more than a score of holdups in Brooklyn and Queens. The police had been watching the couple for some days. They had rented a small kitchenette apartment at 7356 Seacroft Avenue. Suspicion was first aroused when the girl, about to become a mother, was taken in an ambulance to the Canarsie Presbyterian Hospital. Hospital attendants were surprised by Robinson's seemingly endless supply of money. The girl had a private room, expensive flowers and fruit were sent in to her daily, and a well-known physician was called into consultation at the man's request. When it came to the point of registering the name of the baby girl, the young man admitted to the physician that they were not married. One of the hospital attendants, noticing that the woman answered to the description published in the Evening Times of the flapper bandit and her pal, telephoned the police. Plainclothes men sleuthed the couple for some days after they had returned to the apartment on Seacroft Avenue, and this afternoon made the arrests. The arrest of the flapper bandit. A hot biscuit landed on Herf's paper. He looked up with a start. A darky Jewish girl at the next table was making a face at him. He nodded and took off an imaginary hat. "I thank thee, lovely nymph," he said thickly, and began eating the biscuit. "Quit dat jur here." The young man who sat beside her, who looked like a prizefighter's trainer, bellowed in her ear. The people at Herf's table all had their mouths open laughing. He picked up his check, vaguely said good night and walked out. The clock over the cashier's desk said 3 o'clock. Outside, a rowdy scattering of people still milled about Columbus Circle. A smell of rainy pavements mingled with the exhausts of cars, and occasionally there was a whiff of wet earth and sprouting grass from the park. He stood a long time on the corner, not knowing which way to go. These nights he hated to go home. He felt vaguely sorry that the flapper bandit and her pal had been arrested. He wished they could have escaped. He had looked forward to reading their exploits every day in the papers. Poor devils, he thought. And with a newborn baby too. Meanwhile a rumpus had started behind him in Childs. He went back and looked through the window across the griddle where sizzled 3 abandoned butter cakes. The waiters were struggling to eject a tall man in a dress suit. The thick-jawed friend of the Jewish girl who had thrown the biscuit was being held back by his friends. Then the bouncer elbowed his way through the crowd. He was a small, broad-shouldered man with deep-set, tired monkey eyes. Calmly and without enthusiasm he took hold of the tall man. In a flash he had him shooting through the door. Out on the pavement the tall man looked about him dazedly and tried to straighten his collar. At that moment a police wagon drove up jingling. 2 policemen jumped out and quickly arrested 3 Italians who stood chatting quietly on the corner. Herf and the tall man in the dress suit looked at each other, almost spoke and walked off greatly sobered in opposite directions. The burthen of Nineveh. Seeping in red twilight out of the Gulf Stream fog, throbbing brass throat that howls through the stiff-fingered streets, prying open glazed eyes of skyscrapers. Splashing red lead on the girdered thighs of the 5 bridges, teasing caterwauling tugboats into heat under the toppling smoke trees of the harbor. Spring puckering our mouths, spring giving us gooseflesh grows gigantic out of the droning of sirens, crashes with enormous scaring din through the halted traffic, between attentive frozen tiptoe blocks. Mr. Dench with the collar of his woolly ulster up round his ears and a big English cap pulled down far over his eyes, walked nervously back and forth on the damp boat deck of the Volendam. He looked out through a drizzly rain at the grey wharf houses and the waterfront buildings etched against a sky of inconceivable bitterness. A ruined man, he kept whispering to himself. At last the ship's whistle boomed out for the 3rd time. Mr. Dench, his fingers in his ears, stood screened by a lifeboat watching the rift of dirty water between the ship's side and the wharf widen. The deck trembled under his feet as the screws bit into the current. Grey like a photograph the buildings of Manhattan began sliding by. Below decks the band was playing "Oh Tighten E." Red ferryboats, car ferries, tugs, sands cows, lumber schooners, tramp steamers drifted between him and the steaming towering city that gathered itself into a pyramid and began to sink mistily into the brown-green water of the bay. Mr. Dench went below to his stateroom. Mrs. Dench in a cloche hat hung with a yellow veil was crying quietly with her head on a basket of fruit. "Don't, Serena," he said huskily. "Don't. We like Marion bad. We need a rest. Our position isn't so hopeless. I'll go and send Blackhead a radio. After all it's his stubbornness and rashness that brought the firm to this. That man thinks he's a king on earth. This'll get under his skin. If curses can kill I'll be a dead man tomorrow." To his surprise he found the grey drawn lines of his face cracking into a smile. Mrs. Dench lifted her head and opened her mouth to speak to him, but the tears got the better of her. He looked at himself in the glass, squared his shoulders and adjusted his cap. "Well, Serena," he said with a trace of jauntiness in his voice, "this is the end of my business career. I'll go send that radio." Mother's face swoops down and kisses him, his hands clutch her dress, and she has gone leaving him in the dark, leaving a frail lingering fragrance in the dark that makes him cry. Little Martin lies tossing within the iron bars of his crib. Outside dark, and beyond walls and outside again the horrible great dark of grown-up people, rumbling, jiggling, creeping in chunks through the windows, putting fingers through the crack in the door. From outside above the roar of wheels comes a strangling wail clutching his throat. Pyramids of dark piled above him fall crumpling on top of him. He yells, gagging between yells. Nunu walks towards the crib along a saving gangplank of light. "Don't you be scared, that ain't nothin'." Her black face grins at him, her black hand straightens the covers. "Just a fire engine passin'. You wouldn't be seared of a fire engine." Ellen leaned back in the taxi and closed her eyes for a second. Not even the bath and the half-hour's nap had washed out the faggying memory of the office, the smell of it, the chirping of typewriters, the endlessly repeated phrases, faces, typewritten sheets. She felt very tired. She must have rings under her eyes. The taxi had stopped. There was a red light in the traffic tower ahead. Fifth Avenue was jammed to the curbs with taxis, limousines, motorbuses. She was late, she had left her watch at home. The minutes hung about her neck leaden as hours. She sat up on the edge of the seat, her fists so tightly clenched that she could feel through her gloves her sharp nails digging into the palms of her hands. At last the taxi jerked forward, there was a gust of exhausts and whir of motors, the clot of traffic began moving up Murray Hill. At a corner she caught sight of a clock. 8:15. The traffic stopped again, the brakes of the taxi shrieked, she was thrown forward on the seat. She leaned back with her eyes closed, the blood throbbing in her temples. All her nerves were sharp steel jangled wires cutting into her. What does it matter, she kept asking herself. He'll wait. I'm in no hurry to see him. Let's see, how many blocks? Less than 20, 18. It must have been to keep from going crazy. People invented numbers. The multiplication table better than coup as a cure for jangled nerves. Probably that's what old Peter Stuyvesant thought, or whoever laid the city out in numbers. She was smiling to herself. The taxi had started moving again. George Baldwin was walking back and forth in the lobby of the hotel, taking short puffs of a cigarette. Now and then he glanced at the clock. His whole body was screwed up taut like a high violin string. He was hungry and full up with things he wanted to say, he hated waiting for people. When she walked in, cool and silky and smiling, he wanted to go up to her and hit her in the face. George, do you realize that it's only because numbers are so cold and emotionless that we're not all crazy, she said, giving him a little pat on the arm. 45 minutes waiting is enough to drive anybody crazy, that's all I know. I must explain it. It's a system. I thought it all up coming up in the taxi. You go in and order anything you like. I'm going to the ladies' room a minute. And please have me a martini. I'm dead tonight, just dead. You poor little thing, of course I will. And don't be long, please. His knees were weak under him, he felt like melting ice as he went into the gilt ponderously ornamented dining room. Good Lord, Baldwin, you're acting like a hobbledehoy of 17, after all these years too. Never get anywhere that way. Well, Joseph, what are you going to give us to eat tonight? I'm hungry. But first you can get Fred to make the best martini cocktail he ever made in his life. Très bien, monsieur, said the long-nosed Romanian waiter and handed him the menu with a flourish. Ellen stayed a long time looking in the mirror, dabbing a little superfluous powder off her face, trying to make up her mind. She kept winding up a hypothetical doll self and setting it in various positions. Tiny gestures ensued, acted out on various model stages. Suddenly she turned away from the mirror with a shrug of her two white shoulders and hurried to the dining room. Oh, George, I'm starved, simply starved. So am I, he said in a crackling voice. And Elaine, I've got news for you, he went on hurriedly as if he were afraid she'd interrupt him. Cecily has consented to a divorce. We're going to rush it through quietly in Paris this summer. Now what I want to know is, will you? She leaned over and patted his hand that grasped the edge of the table. George, let's eat our dinner first. We've got to be sensible. God knows we've messed things up enough in the past, both of us. Let's drink to the crime wave. The smooth infinitesimal foam of the cocktail was soothing in her tongue and throat, glowed gradually warmly through her. She looked at him laughing with sparkling eyes. He drank his at a gulp. By gad, Elaine, he said, flaming up helplessly, you're the most wonderful thing in the world. Through dinner she felt a gradual icy coldness stealing through her like Novocaine. She had made up her mind. It seemed as if she had set the photograph of herself in her own place, forever frozen into a single gesture. An invisible silk band of bitterness was tightening round her throat, strangling. Beyond the plates, the ivory pink lamp, the broken pieces of bread, his face above the blank shirt front jerked and nodded, the flush grew on his cheeks. His nose caught the light now on one side, now on the other, his taut lips moved eloquently over his yellow teeth. Ellen felt herself sitting with her ankles crossed, rigid as a porcelain figure under her clothes, everything about her seemed to be growing hard and enameled, the air blue-streaked with cigarette smoke, was turning to glass. His wooden face of a marionette waggled senselessly in front of her. She shuddered and hunched up her shoulders. What's the matter, Elaine? He burst out. She lied. Nothing, George. Somebody walked over my grave, I guess. Couldn't I get you a wrap or something? She shook her head. Well, what about it? He said as they got up from the table. What? She asked, smiling. After Paris? I guess I can stand it if you can, George, she said quietly. He was waiting for her, standing at the open door of a taxi. She saw him poised spry against the darkness in a tan felt hat and a light tan overcoat, smiling like some celebrity in the rotogravure section of a Sunday paper. Mechanically she squeezed the hand that helped her into the cab. Elaine, he said shakily, life's going to mean something to me now. God, if you knew how empty life had been for so many years. I've been like a tin mechanical toy, all hollow inside. Let's not talk about mechanical toys, she said in a strangled voice. No, let's talk about our happiness, he shouted. Inexorably his lips closed onto hers. Beyond the shaking glass window of the taxi, like someone drowning, she saw out of a corner of an eye whirling faces, streetlights, zooming nickel-glinting wheels. The old man in the checked cap sits on the brownstone stoop with his face in his hands. With the glare of Broadway in their backs there is a continual flickering of people past him towards the theaters down the street. The old man is sobbing through his fingers in a sour reek of gin. Once in a while he raises his head and shouts hoarsely, I can't, don't you see I can't. The voice is inhuman like the splitting of a plank. Footsteps quicken. Middle-aged people look the other way. Two girls giggle shrilly as they look at him. Street urchins nudging each other peer in and out through the dark crowd. Bum hooch. He'll get his when the cop on the block comes by. Prohibition liquor. The old man lifts his wet face out of his hands, staring out of sightless bloody-rimmed eyes. People back off, step on the feet of the people behind them. Like splintering wood the voice comes out of him. Don't you see I can't? I can't. I can't. When Alice Sheffield dropped into the stream of women going through the doors of Lord and Taylor's and felt the close smell of stuffs in her nostrils, something went click in her head. First she went to the glove counter. The girl was very young and had long curved black lashes and a pretty smile. They talked of permanent waves while Alice tried on gray kids, white kids with a little fringe like a gauntlet. Before she tried it on, the girl deftly powdered the inside of each glove out of a long-necked wooden shaker. Alice ordered 6 pairs. Yes, Mrs. Roy Sheffield. Yes, I have a charge account, here's my card. I'll be having quite a lot of things sent. And to herself she said all the while, ridiculous how I've been going round in rags all winter. When the bill comes Roy'll have to find some way of paying it, that's all. Time he stopped mooning round anyway. I've paid enough bills for him in my time, God knows. Then she started looking at flesh-colored silk stockings. She left the store, her head still in a whirl of long vistas of counters in a violet electric haze, of braided embroidery and tassels and nasturtium-tinted silks. She had ordered 2 summer dresses and an evening wrap. At Maillard's she met a tall blonde Englishman with a cone-shaped head and pointed wisps of tow-colored mustaches under his long nose. Oh Buck, I'm having the grandest time. I've been going berserk in Lord and Taylor's. Do you know that it must be a year and a half since I've bought any clothes? Poor old thing, he said as he motioned her to a table. Tell me about it. She let herself flop into a chair, suddenly whimpering, Oh Buck, I'm so tired of it all. I don't know how much longer I can stand it. Well, you can't blame me. You know what I want you to do. Well, suppose I did. It'd be topping, we'd hit it off like anything. But you must have a bit of beef tea or something. You need picking up. She giggled. You old dear, that's just what I do need. Well, how about making tracks for Calgary? I know a fellow there who'll give me a job, I think. Oh, let's go right away. I don't care about clothes or anything. Roy can send those things back to Lord and Taylor's. Got any money, Buck? A flush started on his cheekbones and spread over his temples to his flat irregular ears. I confess, Al darling, that I haven't a penny. I can pay for lunch. Oh hell, I'll cash a check, the account's in both our names. They'll cash it for me at the Biltmore, they know me there. When we get to Canada everything will be quite alright, I can assure you. In His Majesty's Dominion, the name of Buckminster has rather more weight than in the US. Oh, I know, darling, it's nothing but money in New York. When they were walking up Fifth Avenue she hooked her arm in his suddenly. Oh, Buck, I have the most horrible thing to tell you. It made me deathly ill. You know what I told you about the awful smell we had in the apartment we thought was rats? This morning I met the woman who lives on the ground floor. Oh, it makes me sick to think of it. Her face was green as that bus. It seems they've been having the plumbing examined by an inspector. They arrested the woman upstairs. Oh, it's too disgusting. I can't tell you about it. I'll never go back there. I'd die if I did. There wasn't a drop of water in the house all day yesterday. What was the matter? It's too horrible. Tell it to Popper. Buck, they won't know you when you get back home to Orphan Manor. But what was it? There was a woman upstairs who did illegal operations, abortions. That was what stopped up the plumbing. Good God. Somehow that's the last straw. And Roy sitting limp over his damn paper in the middle of that stench with that horrible adenoid expression on his face. Poor little girl. But Buck, I couldn't cash a check for more than $200. It'll be an overdraft as it is. Will that get us to Calgary? Not very comfortably. There's a man I know in Montreal who'll give me a job writing society notes. Beastly thing to do, but I can use an assumed name. Then we can trot along from there when we get a little more spondylix, as you call it. How about cashing that check now? She stood waiting for him beside the information desk while he went to get the tickets. She felt alone and tiny in the middle of the great white vault of the station. All her life with Roy was going by her like a movie reeled off backwards, faster and faster. Buck came back looking happy and masterful, his hands full of greenbacks and railway tickets. No train till 7:10 Al, he said. Suppose you go to the Palace and leave me a seat at the box office. I'll run up and fetch my kit. Won't take a sec. Here's a $5. And he had gone, and she was walking alone across 43rd Street on a hot May afternoon. For some reason she began to cry. People stared at her, she couldn't help it. She walked on doggedly with the tears streaming down her face. Earthquake insurance, that's what they calls it. A whole lot of good it'll do them when the anger of the Lord smokes out the city like you would a hornet's nest and he picks it up and shakes it like a cat shakes a rat. Earthquake insurance. Joe and Skinny wished that the man with whiskers like a bottle cleaner who stood over their campfire mumbling and shouting would go away. They didn't know whether he was talking to them or to himself. They pretended he wasn't there and went on nervously preparing to grill a piece of ham on a gridiron made of an old umbrella frame. Below them beyond a sulphur-green lace of budding trees was the Hudson going silver with evening and the white palisade of apartment houses of Upper Manhattan. Don't say nut 10, whispered Joe, making a swift cranking motion in the region of his ear. He's nuts. Skinny had gooseflesh down the back, he felt his lips getting cold, he wanted to run. That ham? Suddenly the man addressed them in a purring benevolent voice. Yes sir, said Joe shakily after a pause. Don't you know that the Lord God forbade his children to eat the flesh of swine? His voice went to its sing-song mumbling and shouting. Gabriel, brother Gabriel, is it all right for these kids to eat ham? Sure. The angel Gabriel, he's a good friend o' mine, see, he said it's all right this once if you don't do it no more. Look out brother, you'll burn it. Skinny had got to his feet. Sit down brother. I won't hurt you. I understand kids. We like kids, me and the Lord God. Scared of me 'cause I'm a tramp, ain't you? Well, lemme tell you something, don't you never be afraid of a tramp. Tramps won't hurt ye, they're good people. The Lord God was a tramp when he lived on earth. My buddy the angel Gabriel says he's been a tramp many a time. Look, I got some fried chicken an old colored woman gave me. Oh lordy me. Groaning he sat down on a rock beside the two boys. We was going to play Injuns, but now I guess we'll play tramps, said Joe, warming up a little. The tramp brought a newspaper package out of the formless pocket of his weather-green coat and began unwrapping it carefully. A good smell began to come from the sizzling ham. Skinny sat down again, still keeping as far away as he could without missing anything. The tramp divided up his chicken and they began to eat together. Gabriel, old scout, will you just look at that? The tramp started his sing-song shouting that made the boys feel scared again. It was beginning to get dark. The tramp was shouting with his mouth full, pointing with a drumstick towards the flickering checkerboard of lights going on up Riverside Drive. Just set here a minute and look at her, Gabriel. Look at the old bitch, if you'll pardon the expression. Earthquake insurance, gosh, they need it, don't they? Do you know how long God took to destroy the Tower of Babel, folks? 7 minutes. Do you know how long the Lord God took to destroy Babylon and Nineveh? 7 minutes. There's more wickedness in one block in New York City than there was in a square mile in Nineveh, and how long do you think the Lord God of Sabaoth will take to destroy New York City and Brooklyn and the Bronx? 7 seconds. 7 seconds. Say, kiddo, what's your name? He dropped into his low purring voice and made a pass at Joe with his drumstick. Joseph Cameron Parker. We live in Union. And what's yours? Antonio Cameron, the guys call me Skinny. This guy's my cousin. His folks they changed their name to Parker, see? Changing your name won't do no good, they got all the aliases down in the judgment book. And verily I say unto you, the Lord's day is at hand. It was only yesterday that Gabriel says to me, well, Jonah, shall we let her rip? And I says to him, Gabriel, old scout, think of the women and children and the little babies that don't know no better. If you shake it down with an earthquake and fire and brimstone from heaven, they'll all be killed same as the rich people and sinners. And he says to me, all right, Jonah, old horse, have it your own way. We won't foreclose on 'em for a week or two. But it's terrible to think of, folks, the fire and brimstone and the earthquake and the tidal wave and the tall buildings crashing together. Joe suddenly slapped Skinny on the back. You're it, he said, and ran off. Skinny followed him, stumbling along the narrow path among the bushes. He caught up to him on the asphalt. Jez, that guy's nuts, he called. Shut up, can't ye, snapped Joe. He was peering back through the bushes. They could still see the thin smoke of their little fire against the sky. The tramp was out of sight. They could just hear his voice calling, Gabriel, Gabriel. They ran on breathless towards the regularly spaced safe arclights and the street. Jimmy Herf stepped out from in front of the truck, the mudguard just grazed the skirt of his raincoat. He stood a moment behind an L stanchion while the icicle thawed out of his spine. The door of a limousine suddenly opened in front of him and he heard a familiar voice that he couldn't place. Jump in, Mr. Herf. Can I take you somewhere? As he stepped in mechanically, he noticed that he was stepping into a Rolls-Royce. The stout red-faced man in a derby hat was Congo. Sit down, Mr. Herf. Very pleased to see you. Where were you going? I wasn't going anywhere in particular. Come up to the house, I want to show you something. How are you today? Oh, fine. No, I mean I'm in a rotten mess, but it's all the same. Tomorrow maybe I go to jail, 6 months, but maybe not. Congo laughed in his throat and straightened carefully his artificial leg. So they've nailed you at last, Congo? Conspiracy. But no more Congo Jake, Mr. Herf. Call me Armand. I'm married now, Armand Duval, Park Avenue. How about the Marquis de Coulommiers? That's just for the trade. So things look pretty good, do they? Congo nodded. If I go to Atlanta, which I hope not, in 6 months I come out of jail a millionaire. Mr. Herf, if you need money, just say the word. I lend you $200. In 5 years even you pay it back. I know you. Thanks, it's not exactly money I need, that's the hell of it. How's your wife? She's so beautiful. We're getting a divorce. She served the papers on me this morning. That's all I was waiting in this goddamn town for. Congo bit his lips. Then he tapped Jimmy gently on the knee with his forefinger. In a minute we'll get to the goose. I give you one very good drink. Yes, wait, Congo shouted to the chauffeur as he walked with a stately limp, leaning on a gold-knobbed cane, into the streaky marble hallway of the apartment house. As they went up in the elevator he said, maybe you stay to dinner. I'm afraid I can't tonight, Armand. I have one very good cook. When I first come to New York maybe 20 years ago, there was a feller on the boat. This is the door, C.A.D., Armand Duval. Him and me ran away together and always he say to me, Armand you never make a success, too lazy, run after the little girls too much. Now he's my cook, first-class chef, cordon bleu, eh. Life is one funny ting, Mr. Herf. Gee this is fine, said Jimmy Herf leaning back in a high-backed Spanish chair in the Black Walnut Library with a glass of old bourbon in his hand. Congo. I mean Armand, if I'd been God and had to decide who in this city should make $1 million and who shouldn't I swear you're the man I should have picked. Maybe by and by the missus come in. Very pretty I show you. He made curly motions with his fingers round his head. Very much blonde hair. Suddenly he frowned. But Mr. Herf, if there is anything any time I can do for you, money or like that, you let me know eh? It's 10 years now you and me very good friend. One more drink? On his third glass of bourbon Herf began to talk. Congo sat listening with his heavy lips a little open, occasionally nodding his head. The difference between you and me is that you're going up in the social scale, Armand, and I'm going down. When you were a mess boy on a steamboat I was a horrid little chalky-faced kid living at the Ritz. My mother and father did all this Vermont marble black walnut grand Babylonian stuff, there's nothing more for me to do about it. Women are like rats, you know, they leave a sinking ship. She's going to marry this man Baldwin who's just been appointed district attorney. They're said to be grooming him for mayor on a fusion reform ticket. The delusion of power, that's what's biting him. Women fall for it like hell. If I thought it'd be any good to me I swear I've got the energy to sit up and make $1 million. But I get no organic sensation out of that stuff anymore. I've got to have something new, different. Your sons'll be like that Congo. If I'd had a decent education and started soon enough I might have been a great scientist. If I'd been a little more highly sexed I might have been an artist or gone in for religion. But here I am by Jesus Christ almost 30 years old and very anxious to live. If I were sufficiently romantic I suppose I'd have killed myself long ago just to make people talk about me. I haven't even got the conviction to make a successful drunkard. Looks like, said Congo filling the little glasses again with a slow smile, Mr. Herf you think too much. Of course I do Congo, of course I do, but what the hell am I going to do about it? Well when you need a little money remember Armand Duval. Want a chaser? Herf shook his head. I've got to chase myself. So long Armand. In the colonnaded marble hall he ran into Nevada Jones. She was wearing orchids. Hello Nevada, what are you doing in this palace of sin? I live here, what do you think? I married a friend of yours the other day, Armand Duval. Want to come up and see him? Just been. He's a good scout. He sure is. What did you do with little Tony Hunter? She came close to him and spoke in a low voice. Just forget about me and him will you? God the boy's breath knock you down. Tony's one of God's mistakes, I'm through with him. Found him chewing the edges of the rug rolling on the floor of the dressing room one day because he was afraid he was going to be unfaithful to me with an acrobat. I told him he'd better go and be it and we busted up right there. But honest I'm out for connubial bliss this time, right on the level, so for God's sake don't let anybody spring anything about Tony or about Baldwin either on Armand, though he knows he wasn't hitching up to any plaster virgin. Why don't you come up and eat with us? I can't. Good luck, Nevada. The whiskey warm in his stomach, tingling in his fingers, Jimmy Herf stepped out into 7 o'clock Park Avenue, whirring with taxicabs, streaked with smells of gasoline and restaurants and twilight. It was the first evening James Merivale had gone to the Metropolitan Club since he had been put up for it. He had been afraid that, like carrying a cane, it was a little old for him. He sat in a deep leather chair by a window smoking a 35-cent cigar with the Wall Street Journal on his knee and a copy of the Cosmopolitan leaning against his right thigh and, with his eyes on the night flawed with lights like a crystal. He abandoned himself to reverie, economic depression. $10 million. After the war slump. Some smash, I'll tell the world. Blackhead and Dench fail for $10 million. Dench left the country some days ago. Blackhead incommunicado in his home at Great Neck. One of the oldest and most respected import and export firms in New York, $10 million. Oh, it's always fair weather when good fellows get together. That's the thing about banking. Even in a deficit there's money to be handled, collateral. These commercial propositions always entail a margin of risk. We get M coming or else we get M going, Merivale. That's what old Perkins said when Cunningham mixed him that Jack Rose. With a stein on the tabule and a good song ringing clear. Good connection that feller. Maisie knew what she was doing after all. A man in a position like that's always likely to be blackmailed. A fool not to prosecute. Girl's crazy, he said, married to another man of the same name. Ought to be in a sanitarium, a case like that. God, I'd have dusted his hide for him. Circumstances exonerated him completely, even mother admitted that. Oh, Sinbad was in bad in Tokyo and Rome, that's what Jerry used to sing. Poor old Jerry never had the feeling of being in good right in on the ground floor of the Metropolitan Club. Comes of poor stock. Take Jimmy now. Hasn't even that excuse, an out-and-out failure, a misfit from way back. Guess old man Herf was pretty wild, a yachtsman. Used to hear mother say Aunt Lily had to put up with a whole lot. Still he might have made something of himself with all his advantages, dreamer, wanderlust. Greenwich Village stuff. And Dad did every bit as much for him as he did for me. And this divorce now. Adultery, with a prostitute like as not. Probably had syphilis or something. $10 million failure. Failure. Success. $10 million success. 10 years of successful banking. At the dinner of the American Bankers Association last night, James Merivale, president of the Bank and Trust Company, spoke in answer to the toast 10 years of progressive banking. Reminds me, gentlemen, of the old darky who was very fond of chicken. But if you will allow me a few serious words on this festive occasion, flashlight photograph, there is a warning note I should like to sound. Feel it my duty as an American citizen, as president of a great institution of nationwide, international in the better sense, nay, universal contacts and loyalties, flashlight photograph. At last making himself heard above the thunderous applause, James Merivale, his stately steel-gray head shaking with emotion, continued his speech. Gentlemen, you do me too much honor. Let me only add that in all trials and tribulations, becalmed amid the dark waters of scorn or spurning the swift rapids of popular estimation, amid the still small hours of the night, and in the roar of millions at noonday, my staff. My bread of life, my inspiration has been my triune loyalty to my wife, my mother, and my flag. The long ash from his cigar had broken and fallen on his knees. James Merivale got to his feet and gravely brushed the light ash off his trousers. Then he settled down again and with an intent frown began to read the article on foreign exchange in the Wall Street Journal. They sit up on 2 stools in the lunch wagon. Say, kid, how the hell did you come to sign up on that old scow? Wasn't anything else going out east? Well, you sure have dished your gravy this time, kid. Captain, S.A. Dopehead, first officers the damnedest crook out, oh sing sing, crews a lot, oh bohunks, the old tub ain't worth the salvage of her. What was your last job? Night clerk in a hotel. Listen to that cookie. Jesus carest a mighty look at a guy who'll give up a good job clerkin' in a swell hotel in New York City to sign on as mess boy on Davy Jones' own steam yacht. A fine sea cook you're goin' to make. The younger man is flushing. How about that hamburger, he shouts at the counterman. After they have eaten, while they are finishing their coffee, he turns to his friend and asks in a low voice, say Rooney, was you ever overseas, in the war? I made Saint Nazaire a couple o' times. Why? I dunno. It kinder gave me the itch. I was 2 years in it. Things ain't been the same. I used to think all I wanted was to get a good job and marry and settle down, and now I don't give a damn. I can keep a job for 6 months or so and then I get the almighty itch, see? So I thought I ought to see the Orient a bit. Never you mind, says Rooney shaking his head. You're goin' to see it, don't you worry about that. What's the damage? The young man asks the counterman. They must have caught you young. I was 16 when I enlisted. He picks up his change and follows Rooney's broad shambling back into the street. At the end of the street, beyond trucks and the roofs of warehouses, he can see masts and the smoke of steamers and white steam rising into the sunlight. Pull down the shade, comes the man's voice from the bed. I can't, it's busted. Oh hell, here's the whole business down. Anna almost bursts out crying when the roll hits her in the face. You fix it, she says going towards the bed. What do I care, they can't see in, says the man catching hold of her laughing. It's just those lights, she moans, wearily letting herself go limp in his arms. It is a small room the shape of a shoebox with an iron bed in the corner of the wall opposite the window. A roar of streets rises to it, rattling up a V-shaped recess in the building. On the ceiling she can see the changing glow of electric signs along Broadway, white, red, green, then a jumble like a bubble bursting, and again white, red, green. Oh Dick, I wish you'd fix that shade, those lights give me the willies. The lights are all right Anna, it's like bein' in a theater. It's the gay white way, like they used to say. That stuff's all right for you out-of-town fellers, but it gives me the willies. So you're workin' for Madame Sobrine now, are you Anna? You mean I'm scab-bin. I know it. The old woman threw me out and it was get a job or croak. A nice girl like you Anna could always find a boyfriend. God, you buyers are a dirty lot. You think that because I'll go with you, I'd go with anybody. Well, I wouldn't, do you get that? I didn't mean that Anna. Gee, you're awful quick tonight. I guess it's my nerves. This strikin' the old woman throwin' me out and scab-bin up at Subrin's, it'd get anybody's goat. They can all go to hell for all I care. Why won't they leave you alone? I never did nothin' to hurt anybody in my life. All I want is for M to leave me alone and let me get my pay and have a good time now and then. God Dick, it's terrible. I don't dare go out on the street for fear of meetin' some of the girls of my old local. Hell Anna, things ain't so bad, honest I'd take you west with me if it wasn't for my wife. Anna's voice goes on in an even whimper, and now, 'cause I take a shine to you and want to give you a good time you call me a goddamn whore. I didn't say no such thing. I didn't even think it. All I thought was that you was a dead game sport and not a cupie above the ears like most of them. Look, if it'll make ye feel better I'll try and fix that shade. Lying on her side she watches his heavy body move against the milky light of the window. At last, his teeth chattering, he comes back to her. I can't fix the goddamn thing. Carist, it's cold. Never mind Dick, come on to bed. It must be late. I got to be up there at 8. He pulls his watch from under the pillow. It's 2:30. Hello kitten. On the ceiling she can see reflected the changing glare of the electric signs, white, red, green, then a jumble like a bubble bursting, then again white, green, red. And he didn't even invite me to the wedding. Honestly Florence, I could have forgiven him if he'd invited me to the wedding, she said to the colored maid when she brought in the coffee. It was a Sunday morning. She was sitting up in bed with the papers spread over her lap. She was looking at a photograph in a rotogravure section labeled Mr. and Mrs. Jack Cunningham hop off for the first lap of their honeymoon on his sensational seaplane Albatross 7. He looks handsome, don't he? He Sue is Miss. But wasn't there anything you could do to stop Miss? Not a thing. You see, he said he'd have me committed to an asylum if I tried. He knows perfectly well a Yucatan divorce isn't legal. Florence sighed. Menfolk Sue do dirt to us poor girls. Oh, this won't last long. You can see by her face she's a nasty, selfish, spoiled little girl. And I'm his real wife before God and man. Lord knows I tried to warn her. Whom God has joined let no man put asunder, that's in the Bible, isn't it? Florence, this coffee is simply terrible this morning. I can't drink it. You go right out and make me some fresh. Frowning and hunching her shoulders, Florence went out the door with the tray. Mrs. Cunningham heaved a deep sigh and settled herself among the pillows. Outside church bells were ringing. Oh, Jack, you darling, I love you just the same, she said to the picture. Then she kissed it. Listen, dearie, the church bells sounded like that the day we ran away from the high school prom and got married in Milwaukee. It was a lovely Sunday morning. Then she stared in the face of the second Mrs. Cunningham. Oh, you, she said, and poked her finger through it. When she got to her feet she found that the courtroom was very slowly, sickeningly going round and round. The white fish-faced judge with nose glasses, faces, cops, uniformed attendants, grey windows, yellow desks, all going round and round in the sickening close smell, her lawyer with his white hawk nose, wiping his bald head, frowning. Going round and round until she thought she would throw up. She couldn't hear a word that was said, she kept blinking to get the blur out of her ears. She could feel Dutch behind her hunched up with his head in his hands. She didn't dare look back. Then after hours everything was sharp and clear, very far away. The judge was shouting at her, from the small end of a funnel, his colorless lips moving in and out like the mouth of a fish. And now, as a man and a citizen of this great city, I want to say a few words to the defendants. Briefly, this sort of thing has got to stop. The unalienable rights of human life and property the great men who founded this republic laid down in the Constitution have got to be reinstated. It is the duty of every man in office and out of office to combat this wave of lawlessness by every means in his power. Therefore, in spite of what those sentimental newspaper writers who corrupt the public mind and put into the head of weaklings and misfits of your sort the idea that you can buck the law of God and man, and private property, that you can wrench by force from peaceful citizens what they have earned by hard work and brains, and get away with it, in spite of what these journalistic hacks and quacks would call extenuating circumstances, I am going to impose on you two highwaymen the maximum severity of the law. It is high time an example was made. The judge took a drink of water. Francie could see the little beads of sweat standing out from the pores of his nose. It is high time an example was made, the judge shouted. Not that I don't feel as a tender and loving father the misfortunes, the lack of education and ideals, the lack of a loving home and tender care of a mother that has led this young woman into a life of immorality and misery. Led away by the temptations of cruel and voracious men and the excitement and wickedness of what has been too well named, the Jazz Age. Yet at the moment when these thoughts are about to temper with mercy the stern anger of the law, the importunate recollection rises of other young girls. Perhaps hundreds of them at this moment in this great city about to fall into the clutches of a brutal and unscrupulous tempter like this man Robertson. For him and his ilk there is no punishment sufficiently severe, and I remember that mercy misplaced is often cruelty in the long run. All we can do is shed a tear for erring womanhood and breathe a prayer for the innocent babe that this unfortunate girl has brought into the world as the fruit of her shame. Francie felt a cold tingling that began at her fingertips and ran up her arms into the blurred whirling nausea of her body. 20 years, she could hear the whisper round the court, they all seemed licking their lips whispering softly, 20 years. I guess I'm going to faint, she said to herself as if to a friend. Everything went crashing black. Propped with 5 pillows in the middle of his wide colonial mahogany bed with pineapples on the posts, Phineas P. Black had his face purple as his silk dressing gown sat up and cursed. The big mahogany finished bedroom hung with Javanese print cloth instead of wallpaper was empty except for a Hindu servant in a white jacket and turban who stood at the foot of the bed, with his hands at his sides. Now and then bowing his head at a louder gust of cursing and saying, "Yes, Sahib, yes, Sahib. By the living almighty Jingo, you goddamn yellow babu, bring me that whiskey, or I'll get up and break every bone in your body, do you hear? Jesus God, can't I be obeyed in my own house? When I say whiskey I mean rye, not orange juice. Damnation. Here, take it." He picked up a cut-glass pitcher off the nightable and slung it at the Hindu. Then he sank back on the pillows, saliva bubbling on his lips, choking for breath. Silently the Hindu mopped up the thick Baluchistan rug and slunk out of the room with a pile of broken glass in his hand. Blackhead was breathing more easily, his eyes sank into their deep sockets and were lost in the folds of sagged green lids. He seemed asleep when Gladys came in wearing a raincoat with a wet umbrella in her hand. She tiptoed to the window and stood looking out at the grey rainy street and the old tomb-like brownstone houses opposite. For a splinter of a second she was a little girl come in her nightgown to have Sunday morning breakfast with Daddy in his big bed. He woke up with a start, looked about him with bloodshot eyes, the heavy muscles of his jowl tightening under the ghastly purplish skin. "Well, Gladys, where's that rye whiskey I ordered?" "Oh, Daddy, you know what Dr. Tom said. He said it'd kill me if I took another drink." "Well, I'm not dead yet, am I?" "He's a damned ass." "Oh, but you must take care of yourself and not get all excited." She kissed him and put a cool slim hand on his forehead. "Haven't I got reason to get excited? If I had my hands on that dirty lily-livered bastard's neck, we'd have pulled through if he hadn't lost his nerve. Serve me right for taking such a yellow sop into partnership. 25, 30 years of work all gone to hell in 10 minutes. For 25 years my word's been as good as a banknote. Best thing for me to do's to follow the firm to Tophet, to hell with me. And by the living Jingo, you, my own flesh, tell me not to drink. God Almighty. Hey Bob. Bob. Where's that goddamn office boy gone? Hey, come here, one of you sons of bitches, what do you think I pay you for?" A nurse put her head in the door. "Get out of here," shouted Blackhead, "none of your starched virgins around me." He threw the pillow from under his head. The nurse disappeared. The pillow hit one of the posts and bounced back on the bed. Gladys began to cry. "Oh, Daddy, I can't stand it, and everybody always respected you so. Do try to control yourself, Daddy dear. And why should I, for Christ's sake? Show's over, why don't you laugh? Curtains down. It's all a joke, a smutty joke." He began to laugh deliriously, then he was choking, fighting for breath with clenched fists again. At length he said in a broken voice, "Don't you see that it's only the whiskey that was keeping me going? Go away and leave me, Gladys, and send that damned Hindu to me. I've always liked you better than anything in the world. You know that. Quick, tell him to bring me what I ordered." Gladys went out crying. Outside her husband was pacing up and down the hall. "It's those damned reporters. I don't know what to tell them. They say the creditors want to prosecute." "Mrs. Gaston," interrupted the nurse, "I'm afraid you'll have to get male nurses. Really, I can't do anything with him." On the lower floor a telephone was ringing. When the Hindu brought the bottle of whiskey, Blackhead filled a highball glass and took a deep gulp of it. "Ah, that makes you feel better, by the living Jingo it does. Achmet, you're a good fellow. Well, I guess we'll have to face the music and sell out. Thank God Gladys is settled. I'll sell out every goddamn thing I've got. I wish that precious son-in-law wasn't such a simp. Always my luck to be surrounded by a lot of capons. By gad, I'd just as soon go to jail if it'll do 'em any good, why not? It's all in a lifetime. And afterwards when I come out I'll get a job as a bargeman or watchman on a wharf. I'd like that. Why not take it easy after tearing things up all my life, Ahmed? Yes Sahib, said the Hindu with a bow. Blackhead mimicked him, yes Sahib. You always say yes, Ahmed, isn't that funny? He began to laugh with a choked rattling laugh. I guess that's the easiest way. He laughed and laughed, then suddenly he couldn't laugh anymore. A perking spasm went through all his limbs. He twisted his mouth in an effort to speak. For a second his eyes looked about the room, the eyes of a little child that has been hurt before it begins to cry, until he fell back limp, his open mouth biting at his shoulder. Ahmed looked at him coolly for a long time, then he went up to him and spat in his face. Immediately he took a handkerchief out of the pocket of his linen jacket and wiped the spittle off the taut ivory skin. Then he closed the mouth and propped the body among the pillows and walked softly out of the room. In the hall Gladys sat in a big chair reading a magazine. Sahib much better, he sleep a little bit maybe. Oh Ahmed, I'm so glad, she said and looked back to her magazine. Ellen got off the bus at the corner of 5th Avenue and 53rd Street. Rosy twilight was gushing out of the brilliant west, glittered in brass and nickel, on buttons, in people's eyes. All the windows on the east side of the avenue were aflame. As she stood with set teeth on the curb waiting to cross, a frail tendril of fragrance brushed her face. A skinny lad with tow hair stringy under a foreign-looking cap was offering her arbutus in a basket. She bought a bunch and pressed her nose in it. May woods melted like sugar against her palate. The whistle blew, gears ground as cars started to pour out of the side streets, the crossing thronged with people. Ellen felt the lad brush against her as he crossed at her side. She shrank away. Through the smell of the arbutus she caught for a second the unwashed smell of his body, the smell of immigrants, of Ellis Island, of crowded tenements. Under all the nickel-plate, gold-plated streets enameled with May, uneasily she could feel the huddling smell, spreading in dark slow crouching masses like corruption oozing from broken sewers, like a mob. She walked briskly down the cross street. She went in a door beside a small immaculately polished brass plate. Madame Sobrine. Robes. She forgot everything in the cat-like smile of Madame Sobrine herself, a stout black-haired perhaps Russian woman who came out to her from behind a curtain with outstretched arms. While other customers waiting on sofas in a sort of Empress Josephine parlor, looked on enviously. My dear Mrs. Herf, where have you been? We've had your dress for a week, she exclaimed in too perfect English. Ah my dear, you wait, it's magnificent. And how is Mr. Harpascourt? I've been very busy. You see I'm giving up my job. Madame Sobrine nodded and blinked knowingly and led the way through the tapestry curtains into the back of the shop. Ah c'est voit. Il ne faut pas travailler, on peut voir déjà de toutes petites rides. Mais ils disparaîtront. Forgive me, dear. The thick arm round her waist squeezed her. Ellen edged off a little. Vous la femme la plus belle de New York. Angelica Mrs. Herf's evening dress, she shouted in a shrill grating voice like a guinea hen's. A hollow-cheeked washed-out blonde girl came in with the dress on a hanger. Ellen slipped off her grey tailored walking suit. Madame Sobrine circled round her, purring. Angelica, look at those shoulders, the color of the hair. Ah c'est le rêve, edging a little too near like a cat that wants its back rubbed. The dress was pale green with a slash of scarlet and dark blue. This is the last time I have a dress like this, I'm sick of always wearing blue and green. Madame Sobrine, her mouth full of pins, was at her feet, fussing with the hem. Perfect Greek simplicity, well-girdled like Diana. Spiritual with spring. The ultimate restraint of an Annette Kellerman, holding up the lamp of liberty, the wise virgin, she was muttering through her pins. She's right, Ellen was thinking, I am getting a hard look. She was looking at herself in the tall pier glass. Then my figure'll go, the menopause haunting beauty parlors, packed in Bonsilla, having your face raised. Regardez-moi si, chérie, said the dressmaker, getting to her feet and taking the pins out of her mouth. C'est le chef d'œuvre de la maison Sobrine. Ellen suddenly felt hot, tangled in some prickly web. A horrible stuffiness of dyed silks and crepes and muslins was making her head ache. She was anxious to be out on the street again. I smell smoke, there's something the matter, the blonde girl suddenly cried out. SHSHSH, hissed Madame Sobrine. They both disappeared through a mirror-covered door. Under a skylight in the back room of Sobrine's, Anna Cohen sits sewing the trimming on a dress with swift tiny stitches. On the table in front of her a great pile of tulle rises full of light like beaten white of egg. Charlie my boy, oh Charlie my boy, she hums, stitching the future with swift tiny stitches. If Elmer wants to marry me we might as well, poor Elmer, he's a nice boy but so dreamy. Funny he'd fall for a girl like me. He'll grow out of it, or maybe in the revolution, he'll be a great man. Have to cut out parties when I'm Elmer's wife. But maybe we can save up money and open a little store on Avenue A in a good location, make better money there than uptown. La Parisienne, modes. I bet I could do as good as that old bitch. If you was your own boss there wouldn't be this fightin' about strikers and scabs. Equal opportunity for all. Elmer says that's all applesauce. No hope for the workers but in the revolution. Oh I'm just wild about Harry, and Harry's just wild about me. Elmer in a telephone central in a dinner coat, with ear tabs, tall as Valentino, strong as Doug. The revolution is declared. The Red Guard is marching up Fifth Avenue. Anna in golden curls with a little kitten under her arm leans with him out of the tallest window. White tumbler pigeons flutter against the city below them. Fifth Avenue bleeding red flags, glittering with marching bands, hoarse voices singing Die Rote Fawn in Yiddish. Far away, from the Woolworth a banner shakes into the wind. Look Elmer darling, Elmer Duskin for mayor. And they're dancing the Charleston in all the office buildings. Thump. Thump. That Charleston dance. Thump. Thump. Perhaps I do love him. Elmer take me. Elmer, loving as Valentino, crushing me to him with Doug's strong arms, hot as flame, Elmer. Through the dream she is stitching, white fingers beckon. The white tulle shines too bright. Red hands clutch suddenly out of the tulle, she can't fight off the red tulle all round her, biting into her, coiled about her head. The skylights blackened with swirling smoke. The room's full of smoke and screaming. Anna is on her feet whirling round, fighting with her hands the burning tulle all round her. Ellen stands looking at herself in the pier glass in the fitting room. The smell of singed fabrics gets stronger. After walking to and fro nervously a little while she goes through the glass door, down a passage hung with dresses, ducks under a cloud of smoke, and sees through streaming eyes the big workroom, screaming girls huddling behind Madame Sobrine, who is pointing a chemical extinguisher at charred piles of goods about a table. They are picking something moaning out of the charred goods. Out of the corner of her eye she sees an arm in shreds, a seared black-red face, a horrible naked head. Oh Mrs. Herf, please tell them in front it's nothing, absolutely nothing. I'll be there at once, Madame Sobrine shrieks breathlessly at her. Ellen runs with closed eyes through the smoke-filled corridor into the clean air of the fitting room, then, when her eyes have stopped running, she goes through the curtains to the agitated women in the waiting room. Madame Sobrine asked me to tell everybody it was nothing, absolutely nothing. Just a little blaze in a pile of rubbish. She put it out herself with an extinguisher. Nothing, absolutely nothing, the women say one to another, settling back onto the Empress Josephine sofas. Ellen goes out to the street. The fire engines are arriving. Policemen are beating back the crowds. She wants to go away but she can't, she's waiting for something. At last she hears it tinkling down the street. As the fire engines go clanging away, the ambulance drives up. Attendants carry in the folded stretcher. Ellen can hardly breathe. She stands beside the ambulance behind a broad blue policeman. She tries to puzzle out why she is so moved, it is as if some part of her were going to be wrapped in bandages, carried away on a stretcher. Too soon it comes out, between the routine faces, the dark uniforms of the attendants. Was she terribly burned? Somehow she manages to ask under the policeman's arm. She won't die, but it's tough on a girl. Ellen elbows her way through the crowd and hurries towards Fifth Avenue. It's almost dark. Lights swim brightly in night clear blue like the deep sea. Why should I be so excited? She keeps asking herself. Just somebody's bad luck, the sort of thing that happens every day. The moaning turmoil and the clanging of the fire engines won't seem to fade away inside her. She stands irresolutely on a corner while cars, faces, flicker clatteringly past her. A young man in a new straw hat is looking at her out of the corners of his eyes, trying to pick her up. She stares him blankly in the face. He has on a red, green, and blue striped necktie. She walks past him fast, crosses to the other side of the avenue, and turns uptown. 7:30. She's got to meet someone somewhere, she can't think where. There's a horrible tired blankness inside her. Oh dear, what shall I do? She whimpers to herself. At the next corner she hails a taxi. Go to the Algonquin please. She remembers it all now. At 8 o'clock she's going to have dinner with Judge Shammeyer and his wife. Ought to have gone home to dress. George'll be mad when he sees me come breezing in like this. Likes to show me off all dressed up like a Christmas tree, like an F&B walking talking doll, damn him. She sits back in the corner of the taxi with her eyes closed. Relax, she must let herself relax more. Ridiculous to go round always keyed up so that everything is like chalk shrieking on a blackboard. Suppose I'd been horribly burned, like that girl, disfigured for life. Probably she can get a lot of money out of old Sobrine, the beginning of a career. Suppose I'd gone with that young man with the ugly necktie who tried to pick me up. Kidding over a banana split in a soda fountain, riding uptown and then down again on the bus, with his knee pressing my knee and his arm round my waist, a little heavy petting in a doorway. There are lives to be lived if only you didn't care. Care for what? The opinion of mankind, money, success, hotel lobbies, health, umbrellas, you need a biscuits. It's like a busted mechanical toy the way my mind goes brrr all the time. I hope they haven't ordered dinner. I'll make them go somewhere else if they haven't. She opens her vanity case and begins to powder her nose. When the taxi stops and the tall doorman opens the door, she steps out with dancing pointed girlish steps, pays, and turns, her cheeks a little flushed, her eyes sparkling with the glinting sea-blue night of deep streets, into the revolving doors. As she goes through the shining soundless revolving doors, that spin before her gloved hand touches the glass, there shoots through her a sudden pang of something forgotten. Gloves, purse, vanity case, handkerchief, I have them all. Didn't have an umbrella. What did I forget in the taxicab? But already she is advancing smiling towards two gray men in black with white shirt fronts getting to their feet, smiling, holding out their hands. Bob Hildebrand in dressing gown and pajamas walked up and down in front of the long window smoking a pipe. Through the sliding doors into the front came a sound of glasses tinkling and shuffling feet and laughing and running wild grating hazily out of a blunt needle on the phonograph. Why don't you park here for the night? Hildebrand was saying in his deep serious voice. Those people fade out gradually. We can put you up on the couch. No thanks, said Jimmy. They'll start talking psychoanalysis in a minute and they'll be here till dawn. But you'd much better take a morning train. I'm not going to take any kind of a train. Say Herf, did you read about the man in Philadelphia who was killed because he wore his straw hat on the 14th of May? By God, if I was starting a new religion he'd be made a saint. Didn't you read about it? It was funny as a crutch. This man had the temerity to defend his straw hat. Somebody had busted it and he started to fight, and in the middle of it one of these street corner heroes came up behind him and brained him with a piece of lead pipe. They picked him up with a cracked skull and he died in the hospital. Bob, what was his name? I didn't notice. Talk about the unknown soldier. That's a real hero for you, the golden legend of the man who would wear a straw hat out of season. A head was stuck between the double doors. A flush-faced man with his hair over his eyes looked in. Can't I bring you fellers a shot of gin? Whose funeral is being celebrated anyway? I'm going to bed, no gin for me, said Hildebrand grouchily. It's the funeral of Saint Aloysius of Philadelphia, virgin and martyr, the man who would wear a straw hat out of season, said Herf. I might sniff a little gin. I've got to run in a minute. So long, Bob. So long, you mysterious traveler. Let us have your address, do you hear? The long front room was full of gin bottles, ginger ale bottles, ashtrays crowded with half-smoked cigarettes, couples dancing, people sprawled on sofas. Endlessly the phonograph played Lady, Lady Be Good. A glass of gin was pushed into Herf's hand. A girl came up to him. We've been talking about you. Did you know you were a man of mystery? Jimmy, came a shrill drunken voice, you're suspected of being the bob-haired bandit. Why don't you take up a career of crime, Jimmy, said the girl putting her arm round his waist. I'll come to your trial, honest I will. How do you know I'm not? You see, said Francis Hildebrand, who was bringing a bowl of cracked ice in from the kitchenette, there is something mysterious going on. Herf took the hand of the girl beside him and made her dance with him. She kept stumbling over his feet. He danced her round until he was opposite to the hall door. He opened the door and foxtrot her out into the hall. Mechanically she put up her mouth to be kissed. He kissed her quickly and reached for his hat. Good night, he said. The girl started to cry. Out in the street he took a deep breath. He felt happy, much more happy than Greenwich Village kisses. He was reaching for his watch when he remembered he had pawned it. The golden legend of the man who would wear a straw hat out of season. Jimmy Herf is walking west along 23rd Street, laughing to himself. Give me liberty, said Patrick Henry, putting on his straw hat on the 1st of May, or give me death. And he got it. There are no trolley cars, occasionally a milk wagon clatters by, the heartbroken brick houses of Chelsea are dark. A taxi passes trailing a confused noise of singing. At the corner of 9th Avenue he notices two eyes like holes in a triangle white of paper, a woman in a raincoat beckons to him from a doorway. Further on two English sailors are arguing in drunken Cockney. The air becomes milky with fog as he nears the river. He can hear the great soft distant lowing of steamboats. He sits a long time waiting for a ferry in the seedy ruddy lighted waiting room. He sits smoking happily. He can't seem to remember anything, there is no future but the foggy river and the ferry looming big with its lights in a row like a darkest smile. He stands with his hat off at the rail and feels the river wind in his hair. Perhaps he's gone crazy, perhaps this is amnesia, some disease with a long Greek name, perhaps they'll find him picking dewberries in the Hoboken tube. He laughs aloud so that the old man who came to open the gates gave him a sudden sidelong look. Cuckoo, bats in the belfry, that's what he's saying to himself. Maybe he's right. By gum, if I were a painter, maybe they'll let me paint in the nut house. I'd do Saint Aloysius of Philadelphia with a straw hat on his head instead of a halo and in his hand the lead pipe, instrument of his martyrdom. And a little me praying at his feet. The only passenger on the ferry, he roams round as if he owned it. My temporary yacht. By Jove, these are the doldrums of the night, all right, he mutters. He keeps trying to explain his gaiety to himself. It's not that I'm drunk. I may be crazy, but I don't think so. Before the ferry leaves a horse and wagon comes aboard, a broken-down spring wagon loaded with flowers, driven by a little brown man with high cheekbones. Jimmy Herf walks round it. Behind the drooping horse with haunches like a hat-rack the little warped wagon is unexpectedly merry, stacked with pots of scarlet and pink geraniums, carnations, alyssum, forced roses, blue lobelia. A rich smell of Maytime earth comes from it, of wet flower pots and greenhouses. The driver sits hunched with his hat over his eyes. Jimmy has an impulse to ask him where he is going with all those flowers, but he stifles it and walks to the front of the ferry. Out of the empty dark fog of the river, the ferry slip yawns all of a sudden, a black mouth with a throat of light. Herf hurries through cavernous gloom and out to a fog-blurred street. Then he is walking up an incline. There are tracks below him and the slow clatter of a freight, the hiss of an engine. At the top of a hill he stops to look back. He can see nothing but fog spaced with a file of blurred arc lights. Then he walks on, taking pleasure in breathing, in the beat of his blood, in the tread of his feet on the pavement, between rows of otherworldly frame houses. Gradually the fog thins, a morning pearliness is seeping in from somewhere. Sunrise finds him walking along a cement road between dumping grounds full of smoking rubbish piles. The sun shines redly through the mist on rusty donkey engines, skeleton trucks, wishbones of Fords, shapeless masses of corroding metal. Jimmy walks fast to get out of the smell. He is hungry. His shoes are beginning to raise blisters on his big toes. At a crossroad where the warning light still winks and winks, is a gasoline station, opposite it the lightning bug lunch wagon. Carefully he spends his last quarter on breakfast. That leaves him 3 cents for good luck, or bad for that matter. A huge furniture truck, shiny and yellow, has drawn up outside. "Say, will you give me a lift?" he asks the red-haired man at the wheel. "How far you goin'?" "I dunno. Pretty far."